guess it's time to talk about Silent Hill then. Give me a second to get into something a little spookier. Alright. Co-host. I got them for my birthday and they make me feel very cute. Yes, it is a little inappropriate for Silent Hill, which is a legitimately dark and disturbing series of games, but I also think it lightens the mood, so we're going with it. We're going to talk about all 9 games in order of release, not counting the visual novels or the things released directly to arcades, and I will briefly discuss the movies. Only briefly, though. We're focusing on the games today, and let's start with the big boy that got it all started, Silent Hill 1. Fun story about Silent Hill 1. My dad rented this game and brought it home for us to play together when I was 9, because we liked Metal Gear Solid, and this game was also made by Konami. We did not get very far in it. The opening sequence where you're chasing your lost daughter Cheryl through the town, and then you find a dog corpse, that's as far as we got. And if we'd gone just a little bit further, we would have gone down into hell and have been killed by demon children, and I probably would have been traumatized. That opening is still really effective. The way the cinematic camera sort of like moves and swerves around, it doesn't just do like the sort of like security camera style footage that Resident Evil does. It will like twist and bend around the environments and kind of float around all dreamlike. And yeah, that supposed to die segment with the screaming babies is a little much. But oh boy, is that a way to start your game with a bang. It is astonishing how much Silent Hill is still to this day scary. Like, okay, yes, the monsters all look like paper crafts and the voice acting is a little silly, but when you're just going through the levels and trying to solve puzzles while monsters are haranguing you or wandering the streets, the atmosphere will start to creep into your brain. The soundtrack is absolutely amazing at engendering fear in a player. It's masterfully constructed, impressively considering that the team that made it was, by their own admission, not really familiar with horror media, but clearly they did their homework. And the titular town is, for the most part, fully explorable. Yes, it's a PlayStation 1 game, so you can't see very far. In this game, it's snow. Most people thought it was fog, but there's like this blanket of weather blocking your view so that you don't get like thrown out of the experience of exploring a town by the shitty draw distance. The shitty draw distance is built into the oppressive mystery nature of exploring the town, and it's extremely detailed. You can only really go in like a few buildings, but man, it's like modeled, and the signs up everywhere, the little details that go into making a world feel real are definitely there. Now the actual plot I find is a bit of a hit and miss bag. When you're just trying to like solve clues as to who this child is that you're chasing that's not your daughter because she's running away, and you're encountering other people around the town who are just as confused as you are, that you get really sucked in. But when you actually start to piece together what is happening, which is basically a cult tried to summon a god, it went wrong, and now the town is haunted, that's kind of boring and not very good. The lady who is involved with the cult is pretty engaging, but there's also just this weird drug-dealing doctor guy who like teamed up with the cult for some reason. He's confusing. The CGI cutscenes, there's not many of them, but for PlayStation 1 era, they look really good, and that one scene where Lisa starts bleeding from her head is better horror filmmaking than any movie made by James Wan. It lasts for maybe 10 seconds, and it is bone-chilling. I will never forget it. I will also never forget the blooper reel that plays after the credits. They did not have the kind of budget to just be making throwaway CGI scenes like this. Like, it's one thing when Pixar does it, they've got Disney money to throw around. This was the first game Team Silent made, and they were a small throwaway project as far as Konami was concerned. This game absolutely lives up to its iconic status. It's amazing, genuinely. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty dated. Not so much in the tank controls, but like when you're doing anything but tank controls, like the back step and the side steps he can do, slow, clunky. Combat's alright, but you're really not supposed to do it for the most part. You're supposed to like do combat so you can get past the monsters, so you can solve puzzles. The puzzles are quite good, which means that the majority of your gameplay loop is good. It's either exploring the town or solving puzzles with monsters harassing you. That kind of breaks down for the handful of boss fights that are just generally not that engaging. They're not a problem necessarily, but I wouldn't miss them if they were gone. And from a survival standpoint, it's probably a bit easier than people used to Resident Evil are expecting. You've got unlimited saves, you've got unlimited inventory, but the storytelling is better. Like, I didn't like all of the story, but I liked a lot more of it than I typically do for PlayStation 1 era games. Silent Hill 1 is a goddamn classic to this day, almost 30 years on. It's really impressive, and a really strong foundation for the even better games to come. Are you okay? I swear I didn't kill him. I just found him like this. I swear. Kill who? You! Silent Hill 2 is a very interesting digression. It's not like how in Resident Evil 1 to Resident Evil 2 you're basically dealing with the same story, just different characters in a different place. It is more of using the town for a completely different purpose. It's no longer about, hey, there's a spooky town with monsters in it. Now it's about, hey, this is a journey that your character is going to go on through basically hell. James Sunderland as a video game protagonist seems like just a typical bland nobody. And that's very deliberate, but he's not. He's actually way more interesting and complex than most characters in fiction. He just doesn't show it because he himself is not like an outwardly very expressive person, and he doesn't really have anyone good to talk to. Silent Hill 2 is much more about 4 characters going on a journey of self-reflection, discovery, interrogation, with the town presenting them with sort of a psychic mindscape to scratch their worst fears. And unfortunately that makes it hard to talk about without spoiling what happens. James meets this character named Angelica, who is trying to find her mom, and over the course of the game, like, you run into her a few times and like, she's suicidal and like racked with trauma from abuse, and like, she's clearly, when you're not talking to her, on her own journey through this town. She's playing a whole different game from James, and he only bumps into her a few times, and he's clearly not equipped to understand what she's going through. And that's just a really uncomfortable place to put a player with their, their player character unable to help, out of control, and lost, unable to truly comprehend the scope of what they're unable to help with. Oh, this is getting to sound a little pretentious. Okay, gameplay-wise, it's mostly just an improvement over 1. The controls are basically the same, but sidestepping, moving backwards, running, it's all a lot smoother. The animations are better. Combat's a little easier. I would honestly kind of recommend turning it up to hard. Oh, these first 3 games have this neat feature where puzzle and combat difficulty can be cranked up separately, which is really nice. Like, it actually changes the puzzles in really interesting ways. So you can get a lot of mileage out of like turning up the difficulty on the brain teasers without having to worry about, the combat, which isn't really fun even on normal mode. Like, it's something you try to avoid for the most part. For the PlayStation 2, it was a technical showcase. They must have gotten a really early dev kit because this is an early PlayStation 2 game and it looks fucking fantastic. The lighting engine is still better than most games bother with. Dynamic shadows are really hard to do, okay people? I just wish these games were a little easier to get into and recommend because Silent Hill 1, yeah, it starts out with that banger opening, but if you just played the school level, you'd be like, I don't get what's so good about it. You gotta play the whole thing. And similarly with Silent Hill 2, you gotta be about 60% of the way of the game and traveling through just a nightmare underworld of hell before the story really starts gripping at your heartstrings and not letting go. But Silent Hill 2 was extremely influential across the series as a whole and is still a high watermark for writing in games as far as I'm concerned. If I were to just tell you what happened, it would be way less interesting than you experiencing it for yourself. That's the main takeaway here. You should play this game. I wish that was easier to do, but we'll get to that. Okay. It's getting a little weird here, but that's okay. You can just go out and clear your head. So Silent Hill 1 was more about the cult, and Silent Hill 2 was more about just the psychic power of the town presenting monsters to people's inner psyche. Silent Hill 3 returns to the cult in a slightly different way. This game stars Heather Mason, daughter of Harry Mason from the first game, and she's a really fun, dynamic character. But I don't think the cult stuff is necessarily a great use of her. What's basically going on here is that the cult is back and they want to use Heather to give birth to their god. So, she starts getting sucked into the Silent Hill world, which is different because now she's getting sucked into the Silent Hill alternate plague demon world when she's nowhere near Silent Hill. I don't actually think the cult stuff is very strong story-wise, but it's mostly in the back half. The first half of the game is mostly about Heather trying to get home and see her dad and not get murked by monsters. And you go through a mall, a subway station, a sort of retail block with a dance studio in it, and a construction site. And these 4 levels give off a really different vibe for the series because it doesn't feel like the monsters live here. It feels like they've very decisively and recently invaded. And there's also a sort of feminine lens to these environments that I feel is lacking from the later segments and the other areas that we see in the games. Because everyone's afraid of spooky hospitals, everyone's afraid of spooky theme parks, but specifically the mall and the retail block with the dance studio, those feel like spaces that women exist in, but don't necessarily feel completely safe. In a way that men really wouldn't, especially the mall. I guess the subway works really well for just about anyone, but the subway in this game is almost completely empty. It's one of the longest stretches of the games without monsters, and it's really unsettling how empty it is. There's no one there. This also adds to how much more interesting and dynamic as a character Heather is. Harry Mason, James Sunderland, and we're gonna get to Henry. They're all just kind of clueless dorks. If I were to dig into them, their actual character traits, there's a lot of differentiation between them, but in the moment-to-moment interactions and their expressions and tone in the gameplay, they're not really doing much. Heather is a teenager who is terrified and angry. She is not happy that this is happening. And whenever some cult person shows up and speaks in nonsense riddles, she just gets pissed at him, which is really edifying as a player. Gameplay-wise, there's a lot more monsters in this one, and the monsters are a lot scarier looking than in Silent Hill 2. In Silent Hill 2, the monsters were a little bit more symbolic of inner torment. Here, they're just trying to freak you out, and they do it very effectively. I don't ever want to see those rotating buzzsaw demons and that sound they make. Combat's improved. You have a block button now, which is useful. There's a more weapon variety. You're still not like, you know, playing it like an action game, but now you have a little bit more choice rather than like a steady progression of better weapons. Now there's actually like, the sword's a little shorter, maybe I should stick with the pipe, even though it does less damage. And continuing the trend of these games just looking really good, this game looks really good. It doesn't do the CGI cutscenes of the first two games, it's all in-engine, and god damn it, I've seen games with worse lip syncing coming out on the PlayStation 4. These cutscenes are legitimately still really impressive. I'm specifically thinking of like The Evil Within 2. I thought those cutscenes looked really weak. And these just look so good. Heather's voice actor is absolutely killing it. Most of the voice actors are killing it, which definitely helps with some of the cult characters. Like I said, I don't find the cult stuff interesting or engaging at all, but their voice actors are definitely giving it their all. Silent Hill 3 is a really good game, and it sometimes gets a little overlooked. It's not the first one, it's not the second one, which like goes really hard in the story department, it's not the fourth one, which just swings wildly in the gameplay department. It is just a general improvement in most things over Silent Hill 1 without, you know, completely changing the formula, and it's really good. These four first ones, you just can't really go wrong. Silent Hill 4 is a very interesting entry. It changes so much. To start with, the premise on this one is that Henry Townsend wakes up one day and he is chained into his apartment from the inside. How the hell did that happen? He's getting pretty desperate, and then one day he finds a big old hole in his bathroom wall, and he's willing to try just about anything at this point. He crawls through the hole, and he winds up in a subway. But it's not like a normal subway. It's weird and dreamlike, and there's this woman here. What's going on? Well, he and the woman go through the subway system, and she dies, and then he wakes up in his bedroom again, and he sees her corpse being pulled out of the nearby subway station. So now Henry has a real mystery to solve for himself. There is some debate in the community as to whether Silent Hill 4 is a real Silent Hill game, whether it was always intended to be a Silent Hill game. I'm not interested in that discussion. It's got the Silent Hill name on it, and most importantly, it captures the oppressive, something-over-your-shoulder horror of Silent Hill. Where the first couple Silent Hills, you feel like you're being followed on your way home. In this one, you're stuck at home. And you're trying to like escape nightmares, but in the same way that you can't get that horror monster off your back. It's just presented differently. And gameplay-wise, it's completely different. It's actually kind of a pseudo dungeon crawler, with the apartment being your home base that you go back to. You can heal, you can manage items here. You'll get to do some cutscening here by looking out the peephole and through a little crack in the wall. Occasionally the radio will click on just to tell you something important happened, and there'll be like notes shoved under the door somehow. It's a very engaging mystery to pick apart as you go, and by the end, like, if you're paying attention to the notes you get, you will know what happened, and it's actually like a really high concept idea that they pulled off pretty gracefully. I'm not going to spoil it here, but someone thought the apartment that Henry Townsend is living in was their mum, and they decided to do some weird stuff. So from the apartment, you go through the hole in your bathroom and you go into these nightmare worlds, and in these nightmare worlds you will encounter other people who have been pulled into these nightmares, and you'll try to save them. It won't really go well. It's not going to go well. There's monsters, and there's also ghosts. These are new. These ghosts are unkillable, can clip through walls, and will damage you when they get close. You can beat them up, which will knock them out for a little bit, but they will get back up at some point and harass you. Thankfully, they don't travel the whole level. They sort of have their like little zones, but they tend to be placed in areas that you may need to go back and forth through to solve some puzzles. You have a limited inventory now, which can get a little annoying, especially with some silly stuff like how bullets don't stack. So 10 bullets take up as much room as a chainsaw. Combat's got a few more wrinkles to it. You can charge up melee weapons for like a big heavy swing, which gives you iframes and therefore makes melee combat kind of a cakewalk if you get good at it. And that kind of makes guns feel useless, but I discovered later that guns will penetrate through enemies and hit most things that you pointed at in a room, as long as they're kind of in the same zone, so they're actually really good for crowd control. And then at about the halfway point through the game, you do manage to rescue someone from being ghost murdered, and now you have to work your way out through the nightmare worlds and their doors, because this person you're rescuing, they can't use the hole. And even if they could, they just end up in your apartment that you cannot escape. So the entire back half of the game is an escort mission. It's one of the best escort missions I've ever played. The escort just really takes care of himself and is for the most part invulnerable. It can change what ending you get depending on how well you take care of them. Now I've just gone on and on about like the gameplay changes because there's just a lot that changed in this game, and from a scare perspective, it's really kicking here. Like the apartment is all in first person. And at the halfway point of the game, the apartment will become haunted at certain points, and these can be really freaky. You've gotten so used to how safe your apartment is, and now ghosts are trying to crawl through the walls. Also, just like Silent Hill 3, the monster designs are just generally improved. Like, even with not counting the indestructible ghosts, some of these monsters are just really freaky looking, like the monkeys with testicle heads, or the twins that walk on their hands. I don't know what they are, but they freak me out. I do not like them. Unfortunately, Silent Hill 4 goes a little too far on the make the game hard and unpleasant to create fear. There's a very fine balancing act in horror games from disempowering the player and just kind of dicking them around. And Silent Hill 4 is occasionally on the dicking around side, especially in the back half of the game when you're juggling so many items. It's a tough game to play through. It's frustrating and not particularly like mechanically rewarding, which is unfortunate because the story is genuinely good and it's so interesting to think about and play. It's just not fun, and for a 7-hour experience that's not fun, kind of a hard recommendation. I liked it a lot, and if you've committed to enjoying the Silent Hill games, you should not skip this one. It's the last one made by Team Silent, so, you know, just nut up or shut up on this one. Okay, so that was the last game made by Team Silent. Let's take a break before we get into the somewhat iffy future that Silent Hill would have and talk about the movies, which are... Okay, the first one's pretty good. Now, the first Silent Hill movie is kind of good, actually. It's an adaptation of the first game. It makes some pretty significant changes. You don't play as Harry Mason. Instead, you play as his wife, Rose, who basically goes through the same plot as him. Harry Mason is played by Sean Bean, who does not die, but is in kind of an annoying amount of the movie for how much he doesn't do. The other major change is that the cult works a little differently, and the reason Silent Hill is all like mystical and stuff is very different. I think it's a change that could have worked. Silent Hill is a series of games made by a Japanese studio interpreting American horror, whereas the Silent Hill movie is made by Westerners who I think have a little bit firmer grasp, so the cult isn't sort of like a weird, almost Shinto-esque like worship cult. It's quite explicitly just Christians who have got all up in the witch-burning nonsense. And in terms of capturing the visuals of Silent Hill, the movie is on point. It almost beat for beat nails that opening sequence where Harry goes down into the basement of the town and is like assaulted by demon babies. Like it copies the camera angles sometimes. It's genuinely impressive. The monster designs are on point. The town looks great. Some of the monsters are a little misplaced. We've got Pyramid Head from Silent Hill 2 and the sexy nurses. Now don't get me wrong, I love the sexy nurses. They look great here, and they're actually used pretty effectively in the movie. But in terms of what they represented in Silent Hill 2, they don't really belong here. And also, the movie just ends on an absolute wet fart. Like, right after you get past the nurses, there's like this enormous exposition dump from a demon who's got like the worst child voice actor, and they just explain the plot for like 10 minutes, and then barbed wire kills a lot of people. It doesn't end well, and it ends really ambiguously. It's a solid 3-star movie. If you're a fan of the games, you'll be like, hey, that's an impressive capturing of the visuals, but you will also be kind of annoyed by some of the changes that just don't work. If you're not a fan of the games and you just want to like sort of get a vibe of them, this is a really good place to start, honestly. Silent Hill Revelations 3D is absolute trash. I mean, what else would you expect from a movie with 3D in the title? And what's wild is that this movie is hilariously well cast. It's got the guy who played Jon Snow, it's got Carrie-Anne Moss, Trinity, it's got Malcolm fucking McDowell for a scene. It's an adaptation, roughly, of Silent Hill 3, and what's really sad is that they've got a pretty good Heather. Like, the actress they got to play Heather is doing a solid job, and that's a good one to adapt, especially coming off the first movie, which was, you know, based on 1. It's the sequel to 1. 3. Numbers. Like, how the hell are there still this many people in the cult after the first movie? I don't know. Like, that was at least kind of vague in going from Silent Hill 1 to Silent Hill 3, the games. You only really saw one cult member. It's reasonable to assume there might have been others. But man, after that first movie, there should have been no one left alive to fuel this plot. No, it's terrible. The first Silent Hill movie's okay. There's apparently a fan edit that cuts out like a lot of the ending and removes most of the Sean Bean scenes that were shoved in by the producers, who didn't understand why having a female lead was a good idea. And Silent Hill Revelations is just bad. Do not bother. Alright, let's move on to the not Team Silent games. Hey, do you know the way out? Are you okay? I don't think I'll be okay again. Silent Hill Origins on the PSP was made by Climax Studios and was the first attempt by a non-Team Silent studio to make a Silent Hill game, and I think they did a pretty reasonable job, especially considering it's on the PSP. It's a pretty solid attempt of capturing the visuals and gameplay of Silent Hill 1 and making it portable and playable in that format. It isn't really hitting all the right notes though. But as the title suggests, this is a prequel. That was not a good decision. It focuses on this truck driver named Travis who's passing through the town right at the moment when Alessa gets burned and like finds himself embroiled in that plot. The events of this plot were described in like the notes and backstory of Silent Hill 1, and if you did the effort, you could like, you know, piece it all together. Watching it happen, not exactly fun to do. Also, I don't think Climax Games really understood the plot of the games. Like, I'm not a huge stickler for continuity. Some people I've seen online got mad that Origins and Downpour don't like match the maps from Silent Hill 1 and 2. Oh my god, people, get over yourselves. But just basic characters and events are just flat out wrong in this prequel. Strange, truly. Kind of a shame too, because Travis himself is not a bad character. He's a little gruff and not particularly interesting, but like I said with Heather, it's nice to have a controllable main character who kind of gets mad when people give him the cryptic runaround. Ooh, you can't know what's going on in this town. You should just leave. No! Tell me what the fuck is going on. There are monsters! And also we get a bit of backstory for Travis, which there's 2 levels focused on him. I don't think the Asylum level was particularly good, but the Motel level, the last one, that's a good Silent Hill level, and the storytelling going on there is kind of up to par. It's just not really the rest of the game at that level. And gameplay-wise, this makes some alterations that kind of change things around. Now you can do melee attacks without weapons, and because of the stun time on enemies, it's actually kind of the best option. But even the weapons you do find, you get like an infinite inventory of like televisions and bricks and wrenches that you like have to shift through and pull out because weapons break now. And the breaking weapons is just really tedious because there's so many lying around, and it's just ridiculous that you're pulling out one of 5 televisions from your inventory. I think part of the reason I enjoyed this game as much as I did is because I did play it on the PSP where it was originally designed for, and 3D action games don't really work super hot on the PSP, but you know, Silent Hill's more of a slower horror puzzle game. That works pretty well with the limited controls, and I don't know, getting under the covers, getting really close with the game, putting on some headphones, turning off the lights, I got into the mood. And it was nice to pick up and put down. I don't know, it's well presented in that format. It's a solid recreation of the Silent Hill 1 feeling. It's not nailing it at every moment, but as a first attempt, it's impressive, and I would have been ready for more. More turned out to be Silent Hill Homecoming. What the fuck? Okay, I am for the most part appreciative to positive on the Silent Hill games made after the original team broke up. I hate Silent Hill Homecoming. It is just a very bad game and an exceptionally poor Silent Hill game. In this game you play as Alex coming home from the army to visit his family, and he gets home and like the town is covered in fog and monsters, and the tone is all wrong, okay? Like, the road disappears into a never-ending abyss, which is a pretty common visual in the Silent Hill series, but, you know, people in town are still, like, wandering around, buying groceries, putting up signs for the people who have gone missing because of monster attacks. They're not, like, freaked out, terrified, but they're also not in that weird, unsettling, are we seeing the same thing level that the early Silent Hill games, especially 2, had. No. Everyone is seeing the same thing, they're just not reacting. The cinematography and film camera work is all wrong. It's way more like jump-scary American horror. It doesn't have any of that slow burn that really made Silent Hill so unique. The combat is just bad. Like, Silent Hill games have never had fun combat, but they had functional combat. This combat is trying to be fun and fails and becomes unfunctional for the most part, with like enormously long stun times, enemies that just power through your hits. You have to take them on 1-on-1, but the enemies are not going to play along for that. The zoom in and the hit and like the attack combos are just, it's bad. I do not like. Hates it. The atmosphere is all wrong. The story, okay. The story is again about cult shit. I don't like cult shit, but I will grant that, like, you know, separated from this game, if you were to describe the plot, it's kind of a neat idea and you could make a good story out of it. They did not make a good story out of it. The animations are really rough. Like, sometimes it looks okay for an early PS3 game, but other times it just looks like shit. The controls are bad, the camera is like really slow and clunky, the town exploration is like super cramped and not particularly rewarding. A couple of the puzzles are alright. Like, okay, I'm gonna say 2 nice things. I already said 1 nice thing about this game, and I will say 1 more nice thing about this game. It is occasionally actually spooky. But the characters suck, the gameplay is not good, it's action heavy without actually being good at action, and it's just very unpleasant. It is not at all a Silent Hill game, except for the name Silent Hill. Like, I said in the Silent Hill 4 section that I'm not really, like, picky about a game really being a Silent Hill game. This is not a Silent Hill game. It fails to be one, and honestly, it might have been better received if it hadn't been called that, because, like, this kind of, like, schlocky action nonsense was pretty popular at the time with stuff like, you know, Alan Wake and Dead Space. I don't think it's anywhere near those in terms of quality, but it might have gotten, like, a fairer shake from everyone if it hadn't compared itself to some of the most stressfully psychological storytelling in gaming. It is easily the most skippable game in the franchise. You will not be missing a goddamn thing if you skip this one. So let's move on to the Wii of all things.
I never thought about it, really. It's like, I am a guy.
Silent Hill Shattered Memories is again made by Climax Studios, the people who made Origins, and it's pretty damn good, actually. This one is a retelling remake of Silent Hill 1, but, you know, instead of Harry Mason, you know, losing his daughter and exploring a hell town, instead it's more of a frozen memory-scape that's explored during psych evaluation sessions. There's like these like in-between gameplay segments where you just kind of talk to the psychiatrist. It's interesting, not particularly true to real psychological evaluation, but, you know, it's like a sitting there and engaging with the game player, it's fine. And right off the bat, I have to compliment this game for just looking really damn good on the Wii. Like, I don't know how they made this game look so good, but, like, the facial animations and texture work is really good. When you're exploring the town, like, the rooms are really detailed with, like, readable signs and, like, a lot of little details in the environments. The flashlight Wiimote controls are really good. Like, the exploration and puzzle solving are on point, and the story is interesting. They cut out the combat. Now, that's not necessarily a problem. You can do a spooky game without combat, but you do need to replace it with something, and this game replaces it with sort of like monster chasey sequences that are just, they're not very good. There's like one towards the end where you have to solve a puzzle in these monster chasey sequences, which made me realize you're supposed to stealth through the monster chasey sequences. Like, they're not supposed to just be chasey sequences. That was not well communicated at all, and most people just end up sprinting through these bits. They are an obvious low point in the game, but when you're not in the frozen monster parts, the game is very engaging. Like, it's fun to explore, it's fun to solve puzzles, there's a real, like, hooky mystery, and the ending twist is it's genuinely surprising. It is a very well-told game that knows what it's trying to do for the most part, and it's just frankly one of the best games you can get on the Wii. But it's not just on the Wii, it's also on the PS2 and the PSP. I don't even know how that's possible, but I checked out the PSP version for a minute, and somehow they managed to cram these highly detailed environments onto the thing, so, like, I don't know, there's a lot to really like about Shattered Memories. It isn't very scary, though. Like, I think the developers at one point said they didn't want it to be called psychological horror, more of a psychological thriller, and that's cool. It's definitely doing its own thing. It is a little unfortunate that it's not like make you poop your pants kind of game, because the other ones are very much like that. But, you know, as its own little thing in the franchise, it definitely earns its place. I like it a lot. Yeah, no, highly recommended. Shattered Memories is very good. Easily one of the best ones after Team Silent left. Most people would consider it their favorite. I personally like Downpour. This has not been fun. But is it over? I don't think it will ever be fully over, but I also don't think we really need each other anymore. So I can just go. I won't stop you. Or miss you. But you'll remember me? Always. Silent Hill Downpour is a very controversial game in the franchise because at launch it was nearly unplayable. It was made in the Unreal 3 engine and by developers who'd never really worked with it at this like sort of 3D modeling scale before, and it just ran like frozen molasses. It was bad, and even post-patch, I've made very sure to get a version of the game playing that is patched. It's still very chuggy at times. It's just not a very well put together game, unfortunately. Which is such a shame because this is the real next-gen Silent Hill experience. Like, it actually feels like it's like evolving into modern game design times while still retaining that Silent Hill-ness that makes the franchise so special. You play as Murphy Pendleton, a prisoner who during a bus crash tries to, escape through the town. And, it sort of does the Silent Hill 2 thing where he gets confronted by his dark past. And as a prisoner, you're very familiar with that dark past because the opening, the tutorial for the game's combat is you just stabbing a guy to death in prison. It made me genuinely uncomfortable. He doesn't look like a nice guy or anything, but he's a human being, and you're just stabbing him brutally. That is a way to start a game. And what really sells Downpour is that it's got the fully explorable town from the first two Silent Hill games. They kind of left that behind as the series went on, but they brought it back for this one, and it's so nice. It's full of puzzles and side quests, actual side quests, and they're not really explicitly marked on the map. When you find them, you'll make a little note on your map, but there won't be much in the game that tells you about them. You have to stumble on them yourself, and that feels really good. The combat works really well. It's got the weapon degradation from Origins, but now the weapon find rate is a lot more balanced, and you can only carry one melee weapon and a gun, so you're not lugging around 5 TVs in your infinite pockets. It feels much less ridiculous. Now, unfortunately, the actual core levels of the game are kind of hit and miss. I liked the the tutorial area where you're trying to go through this gas station diner thing to find a key to get into the town. That's pretty good, but then the subsequent mine level doesn't really feel very Silent Hill at all. The radio tower doesn't feel particularly Silent Hill, and the orphanage is kind of up and down on that level. Sometimes it feels like Silent Hill, but the actual setting is just kind of weird. Yeah, most of the fun I had with this game was exploring the town and just finding new interesting side quests. The actual plot is not super great. Oh, one thing I did like was the mailman. This guy just sort of shows up a couple times and is cryptic, but in a really different way from characters in the past. In the past, Cheryl and the other cult members would be cryptic in a very portentous way. They'd kind of do the Cheshire Cat thing where they clearly know what's going on and are just not going to tell you. Whereas the mailman sort of hits more of, I guess, an X-Files level where he doesn't really give away that he knows what's going on, but how calm and blasé he is with the weird shit, it's clear that he is way too friggin' comfortable with this. And the voice actor sells it. I don't know, I really like that character. A lot of the characters are hitting that level where they're doing double speak. And I don't know, he's good. The orphanage lady's kind of hitting the same level. The prison guard who followed you is, actually, I feel like she's more of the main character than Murphy Pendleton. I kind of feel like she's the James Sunderland of this game, and we're just one of the side characters to her own plot that we just sort of tangentially interact with. It's definitely not hitting the notes as well as Silent Hill 2. It's much less clever and insightful about people, but it's doing it a lot better than Silent Hill Origins or Homecoming did, that's for sure. And like I said, that explorable town is absolutely killer. The final level's good. There's a lot to like about this game. It's unfortunate that I can't really recommend it for the main plot, but it's definitely a game I'm going to come back to and just like get all the achievements one day if I can. I had a lot of fun with Downpour. It's original, and it's clever, and it's well designed. It's just a shame that it wasn't well constructed, because that definitely hurt its sales numbers and review scores. But hey, it's the last real Silent Hill game we got, because Book of Memories is not much of a Silent Hill game. Book of Memories is a dungeon crawler with randomly generated dungeons with a focus on multiplayer elements. Did you miss the part where it was a Silent Hill game? This was well into the Konami is terrible era, and it's just not a very Silent Hill-y game. I forced my way through the entire main plot, and what it is in terms of like as a story is that the mailman from Downpour brings you a book of memories which contains your entire life in it, and you, the character, decide, if I rewrite things in this book that has my entire life in it, what will that do? Turns out it will actually change the events of your own past, but in order to do that, you will have to go through dungeons in the dungeon crawler mode to, you know, overpower the book's mystical forces, whatever. That's not actually a terrible setup for this. And based on various things you do throughout the course of the plot, you can influence how your character interacts with the book. Do they become power mad, since like they can literally just write, I was a famous rock star, and that's true? Or do they realize that it's not a power they should have and get rid of it? Like, there's multiple endings. It's really annoying to get them though, and this game is so underseen that I couldn't even find good clips of these like alternate endings. Like, the only thing I could find was someone filming their PS Vita screen with a handheld camera. And as a dungeon crawler, it's kinda lacking. The combat is, you know, trying to be a bit Silent Hill with weapon degradation and limited inventory, but that doesn't make for a particularly fun dungeon crawler. The enemy variety is very low because Silent Hill was just never a series that had a lot of variety in its monsters. And, I mean, they look really cool, the monsters, but not necessarily from this top-down isometric perspective where you can barely see them. There's no, like, hub you can go to like, restock on healing items. You just gotta go with whatever you find. The dungeons are randomly designed, so maybe the shop for this floor isn't until, like, the very end of the level. It's just kind of messy, and it's not a great dungeon crawler or a Silent Hill game. Alright, this is a huge, huge backhanded compliment, but if you like dungeon crawlers, and also like Silent Hill, and don't mind spin-offs, this is pretty good. Like, yeah, I know, there's a bajillion qualifiers on that, but the basic gist I'm trying to get is that if you can stomach the premise, it's not a bad time. For a little while. Like, if you got a Vita lying around, and you can get, like, the demo for this and play just, like, a few levels, you can have a solid enough time and get the general experience. Like, you won't be missing out on anything in terms of story. The gameplay doesn't really get more complex. I mean, by the end of the game, I just figured out how to, like, build up my combo meter so I do big killer finisher moves, and did that for literally everything. The only thing that stopped me was the boogeyman from Downpour, who was just invincible sometimes for no fucking reason. I don't know, it certainly wasn't worth my time to finish Silent Hill Book of Memories, but I don't really resent it because it is occasionally mindless, grindy fun. It's a horrible thing for the Silent Hill franchise to end on, though. I mean, okay, technically the Silent Hill franchise ended with PT, But you can't really get that anymore, can you? And speaking of games you can't get anymore, it's officially time to talk about how you are just kind of screwed when it comes to getting these games. Oh god, the state of video game preservation is just an absolute shambles, because this is one of the most lauded and foundational horror franchises in gaming, and you can barely buy any of it anymore. Silent Hill 1 is available on the PlayStation Network, but only on the PlayStation 3. Nowhere else. You can't get it on the 4, you can't get it on the 5. What the fuck is up with that? I mean, I have a PlayStation 3 still lying around, but I am a huge retro head, okay? And PlayStation 3 is rapidly becoming unavailably retro. Silent Hill 2 and 3 were re-released on an HD collection, but it is notoriously poorly made. I don't know how, but Konami lost the original code for Silent Hill 2 and 3, and 2 was, they just kind of had to be rebuilt from earlier alpha builds, and the company that was hired to do that did not get enough time or money to do it properly. Nope. Also, they had to re-record the voices for Silent Hill 2 for some reason. There was some conflicts with the original actors. I don't know what's going on there. So yeah, the HD collection of 2 of the best games in the franchise, just complete utter crap that you should not touch. It is available on more modern hardware though, so if you're desperate, the version of Silent Hill 3 on that is a little bit more acceptable. 2 is just a fucking mess. So to play 2, you either have to have a PlayStation 2 or an original Xbox, because it was released on that, or get really good at piracy. Similarly with 3, you gotta have a PlayStation 2, but I pirated this one on my PC, and it's really a good PC port. Like, I'm trying to make these games available to you, and saying go out to BitTorrent or Pirate Bay or whatever and find the game is not really telling you how to do it, but if you're any good at that, the version of Silent Hill 3 I found online is like really good. This game came out in like 2003, and it just installed and ran no problem on my Windows 10 PC in 2020. Like, it was a miracle. All I had to do was mess with the, the display ratio a little, because it wasn't really designed for HD screens. Silent Hill 4, which is a somewhat controversial entry in the franchise, is available on PlayStation 2 and Xbox, used, of course, for over $100-something. As with all of the original 4 Silent Hill games, they're absurdly expensive. It's not really a viable option. But Silent Hill 4 was released on GOG for like $20. I'm not really sure how good the PC port is. I haven't heard anything bad about it, so it's probably a good port. GOG is pretty reliable with those things, so that's probably the most accessible one at the moment. Unfortunately, it's not really the one I'd most recommend playing for people trying to get into the franchise. In fact, it is the one I would recommend least. You really only want to touch that one after you are heavily invested. Silent Hill Origins, good luck getting the UMD. I was lucky enough to download it from the PlayStation Network before they shut that down for the PSP. I don't know what to tell you, there's just no easy way to get that game anymore. And you really would want to get it on a PSP or a hacked PlayStation Vita. We'll get there. Silent Hill Homecoming, the worst one, is ironically super accessible because it was released on Steam at one point. Like, I couldn't really tell you about the port job, but I don't care. Don't play it. Silent Hill Shattered Memories was also released on the PS2, PSP, and the Wii. None of those versions are particularly cheap to get, and you really would want to get it on the Wii if you still have something that plays Wii games lying around. Like, if you're at all into retro stuff, you should probably have a Wii U lying around, but if you're not, I'd be hard-pressed to recommend you track down a Wii just to play this one game. It is a really good game, though. Downpour is sadly trapped on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, and unlikely to ever see a re-release. As far as I know, some pirates have done some weird modding with it, but like, man, that is some deep internet shit. Like, I have hacked my Vita, and the concept of trying to track down a PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 exclusive on PC and then getting like mods for it terrifies me. It's a shame. It's a good game, and like you should really like hold on to as many old consoles as you can reasonably hold on to, because backwards compatibility is just not something that most game studios make a priority. And Book of Memories is only on the PlayStation Vita or the PlayStation TV. It's not a great game, you're not really missing out if you skip that one, but if you happen to have those systems, and if you do, you've almost certainly hacked them, it's the only reason to have them at this point, they're fun to play. Whew! My journey with the Silent Hill games has been really rewarding. I'm very mad at Konami for just sort of like completely dropping the ball when it came to preservation and also, you know, maintaining the franchise once the original creators moved on. They're really fantastic games. I'm not as fond of horror games as I am of horror movies. Horror movies, you can sort of just sit down and like let the enjoyment wash over you. Horror games take a lot longer and are kind of work. They're definitely a lot of effort. And the Silent Hill games are effort, but they're worth it. And I am aware of what things I have been putting in between segments. I haven't been acknowledging them, but yeah, no, I know what I'm doing. I'm just sort of an introspective exploration of my feelings. Don't read too much into it. Unless you are my real life friend, you are not my friend. Don't go thinking you know me just because I put a little bit of myself in my art. But happy Halloween and have a great year.